Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the halls of Kepler Station with her usual calm smile. Other aliens nodded to her as she passed. The tall, blue-skinned Vorthak diplomatic team stepped aside respectfully. Even the fierce-looking Zeph warriors lowered their heads slightly when they saw her. Sarah was used to this treatment. Humans had built this reputation over 300 years of peaceful contact with the galaxy. They were known as the Great Mediators, the species that could calm any conflict and find solutions where others saw only war. She entered the main council chamber where 12 different alien species sat around a massive circular table. The air buzzed with tension. The Kethvar delegation, insect-like creatures with sharp claws and black eyes, sat across from the peaceful Ilari, who looked like walking trees with silver bark. The mining rights to Sector 7 belong to us, clicked the lead Kethvar, his mandibles snapping with anger. Our warriors died claiming that territory. The Ilari representative swayed gently, her voice like wind through leaves. Death does not create ownership. The sector was neutral space. Your aggression violates the Peaceful Commerce Treaty. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that meant her emotion regulators were working. The small device behind her left ear hummed softly, keeping her heart rate steady and her mind clear. Every human had one. They had worn them for so long that most aliens thought humans were just naturally calm. She stood up and both sides immediately quieted. This was what humans did best. "Friends," Sarah said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "I understand both perspectives here. The Kethvar value strength and sacrifice. The Ilari value harmony and fairness. Both are important qualities." She moved to the center of the room, her hands open and relaxed. "What if we created a joint mining operation? The Kethvar would provide security and equipment. The Ilari would handle environmental protection and resource management. Both species would share the profits equally." The Kethvar leader's antennae twitched. The Ilari representative's branches rustled thoughtfully. Sarah could see them both considering her words. This was why humans were valued throughout the galaxy. They could see solutions that others missed. After 2 hours of careful discussion, both sides agreed to Sarah's proposal. They signed the treaty with what passed for smiles on their alien faces. Another conflict resolved peacefully. Another day where war was avoided. Sarah returned to her quarters feeling satisfied but tired. These sessions always drained her, even with the emotion regulators helping. She touched the small device behind her ear and felt the familiar pulse that meant it was working properly. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Marcus Webb was having a very different day. His research ship, the Hippocrates, orbited a dead planet that had once been home to a violent species that had destroyed itself in nuclear war. He was studying their remains to better understand the psychology of aggressive species. Marcus specialized in comparative neurology. He had spent years studying how different alien minds worked, always trying to understand why some species chose violence, while others, like humans, chose peace. But today, something was wrong with his emotion regulator. It had been giving him small jolts of pain all morning. When he tried to run a diagnostic, the device showed error codes he had never seen before. He decided to ignore it and focus on his work. The dead civilization below had been remarkably similar to early humans in many ways. They had been tool users, social creatures, and highly intelligent. But unlike humans, they had never learned to control their aggressive impulses. As Marcus studied their weapons and war memorials, he felt something strange, a flutter of emotion that shouldn't have been there. For just a moment, looking at images of their battles, he felt something that was almost like excitement. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came, suppressed by his regulator. But it left, him unsettled. Humans didn't feel excitement about violence. They were peacekeepers by nature. Marcus decided to run a full diagnostic on his emotion regulator when he got back to his lab. But first, he wanted to check something in the ship's database. He pulled up the historical records of human development. The official files showed the same story taught in every school. Early humans had been tribal and sometimes violent, but they had quickly learned to cooperate and live in peace. By the time they reached the stars, they were already the calm, rational species the galaxy knew today. But something bothered Marcus about those records. They were remarkably brief for such an important period. Most other species had detailed histories going back thousands of years. Human records before space travel were limited to a few hundred pages of very general information. He tried to access more detailed historical files, but found that many were classified at levels far above his clearance. Why would ancient human history need such high-security classifications? Marcus's research was interrupted by an emergency communication from Earth. Dr. Elizabeth Park, the head of Human Health Services, appeared on his screen. She looked tired and worried. "Marcus, we need you to return to Earth immediately. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with the emotion regulation systems." "What kind of difficulties?" Marcus asked. "Multiple units are reporting error, codes across several colonies. We need our best neurology experts to help solve the problem." Marcus felt that strange flutter again. This time it felt almost like curiosity, but sharper and more intense than normal curiosity. His regulator hummed, louder, working harder to suppress whatever he was feeling. "How widespread are these malfunctions?" he asked. Dr. Park hesitated. "More widespread than we'd like." "But Marcus, this conversation is classified. Don't discuss it with anyone until you reach Earth." The communication ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He looked back at the dead planet below, at the ruins of a civilization that had destroyed itself through violence. For some reason, the image didn't fill him with the usual sadness and pity he expected to feel. Instead, he found himself analyzing their military tactics and wondering how they might have been improved. The thought scared him so much that he immediately ran another diagnostic on his emotion regulator. The device showed all green lights, but Marcus wasn't convinced it was working properly. As his ship began the long journey back to Earth, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was changing, not just with the regulators, but with humanity itself. Back on Kepler Station, Sarah Chen was experiencing her own strange moment. She was reviewing the day's successful negotiations when she came across a news report about a recent HFY raid on a human trading post. 3 humans had been killed, including a child. For just an instant, before her regulator could compensate, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before. It was hot and sharp and made her hands clench into fists. It made her think about the HFY delegate she had negotiated with earlier, and for a split second she wanted to hurt him. The feeling vanished so quickly she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. But her hands were still trembling slightly, and her heart was beating faster than it should. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and saw the same calm, diplomatic face she always wore. But behind her eyes, something had flickered. Something that looked almost hungry. She touched her emotion regulator and felt it pulse steadily, working perfectly, just like always. But Sarah couldn't help wondering, what would happen if it ever stopped working? Across the galaxy, more humans were beginning to ask themselves the same question. 2 weeks after Dr. Marcus Webb returned to Earth, the galaxy received shocking news. The HFY Empire had launched a surprise attack on Haven Station, a neutral trading post in the Rim territories. The station had been completely destroyed. Over 3,000 beings from 20 different species had died in the assault. Among the dead were 47 humans, including families with children who had been living peacefully on the station. Ambassador Sarah Chen received the news while having breakfast in her quarters on Kepler Station. She read the casualty reports on her datapad, her emotion regulator humming softly as it worked to keep her calm and focused. But something was different this time. The regulator seemed to be working harder than usual. She could feel it pulsing more frequently behind her ear, and there was a slight burning sensation that hadn't been there before. Sarah tried to focus on the diplomatic response that would be expected. The Confederation would condemn the attack. There would be emergency sessions. Economic sanctions would be discussed. She would probably be asked to mediate between the HFY and the other species to find a peaceful solution that would prevent war. The thought of sitting across from HFY representatives and calmly negotiating after they had murdered children made something twist in her stomach. For a moment, the burning sensation behind her ear intensified, and Sarah found herself thinking about the HFY anatomy. Their exoskeletons were strong, but there were weak points at the joints. Their compound eyes could be damaged easily. Their breathing spiracles were vulnerable to attack. The thoughts came so quickly and clearly that they startled her. Where had that knowledge come from? Why was she thinking about alien anatomy like a soldier instead of a diplomat? Her regulator pulsed harder, and the violent thoughts faded back into her usual calm analysis. But the memory of them remained, like an echo in her mind. On Earth, Dr. Marcus Webb was discovering that the emotion regulator problems were far more serious than anyone had publicly admitted. In his laboratory at the Global Health Center, he had access to failure reports from across human space. The reports painted a disturbing picture. Emotion regulators weren't just malfunctioning randomly. They were failing in specific patterns, particularly when humans were exposed to extreme stress or trauma. The devices that had kept humanity peaceful for 3 centuries were breaking down when they were needed most. Marcus had dissected several failed regulators and found something unexpected. The devices weren't actually broken. They were being overwhelmed. The neural patterns they were trying to suppress had become too strong for the technology to handle. "It's like trying to hold back a flood with a garden hose," he explained to Dr. Elizabeth Park during their daily briefing. The regulators were designed to manage normal human emotional responses, but what they're encountering now is something much more intense. Dr. Park looked worried. "What do you mean by more intense?" Marcus pulled up a brain scan on his monitor. "This is from a human colonist whose regulator failed during the Haven Station attack. Look at the activity in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex." The brain scan showed areas lighting up in patterns Marcus had never seen in human subjects before. The neural activity was incredibly complex and intense, far beyond what modern humans were supposed to be capable of. "These patterns," Marcus continued, "they're similar to what we see in the most aggressive alien species, but they're more sophisticated, more strategic." Dr. Park was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Marcus, I need to show you something. But first, you need to understand that what I'm about to share is classified at the highest levels." She led him to a secured section of the facility that Marcus had never been allowed to access. Inside was an archive room filled with data storage devices and old-fashioned books. The official history of humanity that everyone learns in school, Dr. Park said, is not complete. The real records were classified after first contact with alien species. She handed him a thick folder marked with security warnings. "This contains the actual archaeological and historical data about pre-contact humanity." Marcus opened the folder and began to read. What he found shocked him to his core. Early humans hadn't been the peaceful, cooperative species described in textbooks. They had been apex predators who had conquered their entire planet through violence and cunning. They had driven countless species to extinction, survived multiple ice ages, and spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. Archaeological evidence was overwhelming. Humans had developed weapons technology faster than any known species. They had created military strategies so effective that they had conquered every environment on Earth. They had been so successful as predators that they had nearly destroyed their own ecosystem. After first contact, Dr. Park explained, the government realized that humanity's true nature would terrify other species. We were more dangerous than the HFY, more ruthless than the Vorthak, and more strategically minded than any species in known space. Marcus stared at images of ancient, human weapons and battle sites. So they created the emotion regulators? Along with genetic therapy, psychological conditioning, and educational programs designed to suppress humanity's aggressive instincts. It took 200 years to transform us from apex predators into the peaceful species the galaxy knows today. Marcus thought about his own regulator and the strange feelings he had been experiencing. And now the system is failing? Not failing, Dr. Park corrected. Being overwhelmed. The Haven Station attack triggered responses that have been dormant in human genetics for centuries. Our true nature is starting to reassert itself. While Marcus learned about humanity's hidden history, Commander Jake Morrison was experiencing that history firsthand. He commanded a small defense force on New Pacifica, a frontier colony near Kethvar space. Morrison had always been proud of his role as a peacekeeper. Human colonial forces were known for their discipline and restraint. They were trained to de-escalate conflicts and protect civilian populations without unnecessary violence. But when Kethvar raiders attacked his colony, something changed in Morrison. He watched from his command post as insectoid warriors slaughtered civilians in the colony's main square. His emotion regulator was working overtime, trying to keep him calm and analytical. Standard protocol called for a measured response, evacuation procedures, and diplomatic protests through proper channels. Instead, Morrison found himself studying the raiders' movement patterns with predatory focus. He noticed which warriors were leaders based on their positioning. He identified weak points in their armor and formations. Most disturbing of all, he began planning not just how to stop them, but how to hurt them. When a group of raiders cornered a family with young children, Morrison's regulator finally overloaded. The device behind his ear gave one last pulse and then went silent. The change was immediate and terrifying. Morrison felt his mind expand and sharpen in ways he had never experienced. Colors became brighter, sounds became more distinct. His body felt stronger and more responsive. But most importantly, he stopped thinking like a peacekeeper and started thinking like a hunter. Morrison moved through the colony with deadly efficiency. He used the terrain and buildings like a predator uses cover, approaching the raiders from angles they couldn't anticipate. When he finally confronted them, he didn't fight like a civilized human. He fought like humanity's ancestors had fought, when they conquered a planet full of dangerous creatures. The first Kethvar warrior died before he realized Morrison was there. The second had time to raise his weapon, but not to use it. The third managed to call for help before Morrison silenced him permanently. By the time reinforcements arrived, Morrison had eliminated 12 raiders using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical thinking that seemed to come from nowhere. But what scared him most wasn't the violence he had unleashed. It was how natural it had felt. How right. As Morrison stood among the bodies of his enemies, he realized that the peaceful human the galaxy knew was just a mask. Underneath, something much older and more dangerous had been waiting, and now it was awake. Across human space, more regulators were failing. More humans were discovering what they really were beneath centuries of artificial peace. The storm that humanity had held back was beginning to break free. The cascade failure began 3 days after Commander Morrison's regulator overloaded on New Pacifica. Dr. Marcus Webb watched the reports flood in from his emergency command center on Earth as emotion regulators failed across human space in an accelerating pattern. First, it was isolated colonies on the frontier, then mining stations, then major population centers. Within 72 hours, the technology that had kept humanity peaceful for 3 centuries was failing faster than it could be repaired. It's spreading like a virus, Webb explained to the Emergency Council. When one regulator fails under extreme stress, it creates resonance patterns that destabilize nearby units. The more that fail, the faster the cascade spreads. Dr. Elizabeth Park looked at the failure map with growing horror. Red dots, representing failed regulators, were spreading across the galaxy like drops of blood in water. How many humans are affected? Approximately 40,000 so far, Webb replied, and the number is doubling every 6 hours. What terrified? The medical team wasn't just the scope of the failure. It was what was happening to the humans whose regulators had stopped working. Ambassador Sarah Chen was experiencing the change firsthand. She had been in the middle of an emergency session about the Haven Station attack when her regulator finally overloaded. The Kethvar delegate was defending his people's actions, calling the massacre a necessary demonstration of strength. Sarah had been listening with her usual diplomatic calm when the burning sensation behind her ear suddenly stopped. The constant background hum she had lived with her entire life went silent. The change was immediate and overwhelming. Her senses sharpened until she could hear the Kethvar delegate's breathing, smell the pheromones he was releasing, and see the micro-expressions that revealed his true emotions. But more than that, her mind began working in ways it never had before. She found herself analyzing the delegate not as a diplomatic partner, but as a target. She noted the weak points in his exoskeleton, calculated the force needed to damage his compound eyes, and identified exactly how to cause him maximum pain with minimal effort. When the delegate dismissed human deaths as acceptable casualties, in the natural order, something ancient and predatory awakened in Sarah's mind. Natural order? She said, her voice still calm but carrying a new undertone that made several aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Kethvar delegate's antennae twitched. Yes, the strong survive. The weak are consumed. This is the way of the universe. Sarah stood slowly, her movement fluid and controlled in a way that reminded several observers of hunting predators they had seen in nature documentaries. I see. You believe in the natural order, the survival of the fittest. Exactly, the delegate clicked, not noticing how the other species' representatives had begun backing away from the table. Sarah walked around to the Kethvar's side of the table with predatory grace. Then perhaps you'd like to experience the natural order firsthand. What happened next was captured on security cameras throughout the galaxy. The footage would later be analyzed by xenobiologists, military strategists, and psychologists trying to understand what humanity had become. Sarah moved with a speed and precision that shocked everyone present. Her first strike disabled the delegate's primary arms. Her second targeted his breathing spiracles. Her third and fourth were calculated to cause maximum pain while keeping him conscious. But it wasn't the violence that terrified the witnesses. It was the cold, methodical way she dismantled a trained warrior twice her size, using nothing but her bare hands and an intimate knowledge of Kethvar anatomy that she shouldn't have possessed. By the time security forces arrived, the delegate was alive but completely helpless. Sarah stood over him with the same calm expression she had always worn, but her eyes held something that made even the station's Zeph warrior guard step back. The natural order, she said quietly, dictates that apex predators eat insects, not the other way around. The security footage spread through the galaxy within hours, causing panic in governments and military commands throughout known space. The peaceful, harmless humans had just demonstrated capabilities that redefined their entire species classification. On the research vessel Hippocrates, Dr. Webb received an urgent communication from Commander Morrison on New Pacifica. Morrison's image on the screen showed a man transformed. His eyes held the same predatory focus that Sarah had displayed, and he spoke with a confidence that Webb had never heard from a human before. "Doctor, we need to talk. My entire command staff has had regulator failures, and we're discovering things about human capabilities that aren't in any official records." Webb felt his own regulator pulse harder as excitement and curiosity fought against its suppression systems. "What kind of things?" "We've been analyzing Kethvar military tactics and weapons technology. In 3 days, my people have identified 17 critical weaknesses in their combat doctrine, and developed countermeasures for their entire arsenal. Morrison's smile was sharp and cold. We're thinking faster, learning quicker, and solving problems with methods that should be impossible. Webb reviewed the data Morrison transmitted and felt a chill of recognition. The tactical analyses were brilliant, ruthless, and demonstrated an understanding of warfare that modern humans weren't supposed to possess. "Commander, where is this knowledge coming from?" Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. "That's what I want to discuss. We've been accessing old data files, and I think our ancestors left us more than just DNA. I think they left us memories, instincts, knowledge that's been suppressed but never truly deleted." As if summoned by their conversation, Webb felt another surge of sensation as his own regulator struggled to contain his growing excitement. He was beginning to understand that what they were experiencing wasn't malfunction. It was awakening. Across human space, similar discoveries were being made. Humans whose regulators had failed were displaying capabilities that defied explanation. Engineers were solving technical problems with innovative approaches that surpassed alien technology. Scientists were making breakthrough discoveries at impossible speeds. Military personnel were developing strategies that incorporated psychological warfare techniques no human should know. On the colony world of New Geneva, a human archaeological team had made a disturbing discovery. They had been excavating ruins left by a species that had gone extinct millions of years ago when their regulators failed simultaneously. Without the emotional dampening, they began seeing patterns in the ruins that had been invisible before. The extinct species hadn't died from natural disaster or disease. They had been systematically hunted to extinction by something that understood their psychology, their weaknesses, and their fears. The archaeological evidence suggested that the hunters had been remarkably similar to humans in size and capability, but they had possessed a ruthless intelligence that had allowed them to eliminate an entire spacefaring civilization. Dr. Sarah Kim, the team leader, transmitted her findings to Earth with a message that chilled everyone who read it. "We need to consider the possibility that humanity's ancestors weren't just apex predators on Earth. They may have been apex predators throughout the galaxy." The implications were staggering. If ancient humans had been spacefaring and predatory, then the peaceful species the galaxy knew was not just artificially created. It was a disguise that had hidden the most dangerous predators in known space. As more regulators failed and more humans awakened to their true nature, a new picture began to emerge. The empathy that made humans excellent diplomats was actually a hunting adaptation that allowed them to understand prey psychology. Their pattern recognition abilities, so useful in negotiations, were originally developed to track and predict the behavior of dangerous game. Most terrifying of all, their legendary ability to find peaceful solutions to complex problems was based on an intuitive understanding of how to manipulate, control, and ultimately defeat any opponent. The storm that had been held back for 3 centuries was finally breaking free, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that they had been living alongside wolves who had spent 300 years pretending to be sheep. But the humans were no longer pretending. On Kepler Station, as emergency broadcasts reported regulator failures across human space, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in her quarters and smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. She was no longer bound by the artificial constraints that had limited her species for generations. She began making plans, not for peace negotiations or diplomatic solutions, but for something much more fundamental. It was time for humanity to reclaim its proper place in the natural order. And the natural order, as she had recently demonstrated, was very simple. Predators ruled. Everything else was food. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation was unlike anything in the organization's 400-year history. Representatives from every major species had gathered on Kepler Station to address what they were calling the human crisis. Hi, Chancellor Vorthak, a massive crystalline being from the core worlds, addressed the assembly with a voice that resonated through the chamber like grinding stone. We have received reports from across the galaxy. Humans are changing. The peaceful mediators we have known for centuries are exhibiting behaviors that threaten the stability of galactic civilization. Ambassador Zeph High, whose warrior species had long respected human diplomatic skills, stood to address the chamber. Yesterday, a human trade negotiator on Sigma Station dismantled 3 of my best warriors using tactics we had never seen. She knew weaknesses in our combat forms that are not recorded in any database. She fought like she had been studying us for generations. Similar reports came from dozens of worlds. Humans were displaying knowledge and abilities that defied explanation. They were solving technical problems that had puzzled alien scientists for decades. They were adapting to new environments with impossible speed. Most disturbing of all, they were analyzing other species with predatory focus that revealed vulnerabilities no one had known existed. Dr. Elizabeth Park stood before the assembly to explain what Earth's government had finally decided to reveal. The truth that had been hidden for 3 centuries. Honorable delegates, she began, what you are witnessing is not a malfunction or disease. It is the return of humanity's true nature. She activated a holographic display that showed archaeological data from Earth. Images of ancient weapons, battle sites, and evidence of humanity's violent past filled the chamber. The humans you have known were artificially created through genetic, therapy, neural conditioning, and technological suppression. The real human species was the most successful predator in our planet's history. The display showed hunting tools that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of anatomy and psychology, weapons designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum psychological impact on enemies, strategic concepts that had allowed small human tribes to defeat much larger and stronger opponents. We eliminated the megafauna of our planet not through luck or accident, but through systematic hunting campaigns that lasted thousands of years. We survived ice ages, volcanic catastrophes, and ecological collapses that destroyed countless other species. We did this through adaptation, cunning, and a form of intelligence specifically evolved for predation. The alien delegates listened, in growing horror as Park continued her presentation. Human empathy, which you have valued so highly in diplomatic settings, is actually a hunting adaptation. We evolved the ability to understand the thoughts and feelings of other creatures so we could predict their behavior and exploit their weaknesses. She showed brain scans comparing human neural patterns to those of other predatory species. Our pattern recognition abilities, our strategic thinking, our capacity for cooperation, all of these were originally developed to make us more effective predators. Chancellor Vorthak's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light patterns. Are you telling us that humanity's role as peacekeepers was based on predatory instincts? Exactly, Park replied. We became excellent mediators because we intuitively understood how to manipulate the psychology of every species we encountered. What you interpreted as wisdom was actually predatory analysis. On New Pacifica, Commander Morrison was discovering just how deep humanity's hidden knowledge went. His regiment of peacekeeping forces had transformed into something that resembled no military unit in galactic history. Without their emotion regulators, Morrison's soldiers were thinking with a clarity and focus that amazed them. They had taken apart every piece of alien technology they could find and reverse-engineered improvements within days. Their modifications weren't just functional, they were elegant solutions that demonstrated an intuitive understanding of physics and engineering that surpassed the original designers. Sir, reported Lieutenant Chen, whose regulator had failed 2 days earlier, we've completed the analysis of Kethvar military doctrine. Their entire strategic philosophy is based on intimidation and direct confrontation. They've never faced an enemy that understands psychological warfare. Morrison reviewed her report, and smiled coldly. The tactical analysis was brilliant in its ruthlessness. It didn't just identify how to defeat Kethvar forces, it explained how to break their will to fight by targeting their cultural foundations. They based their entire identity on being superior warriors, Chen continued. If we can demonstrate that their warrior culture is ineffective against human tactics, we won't just defeat them. We'll destroy their psychological foundation as a species. Morrison felt a surge of admiration for Chen's strategic thinking. This was the kind of warfare that his ancestors had perfected. Victory achieved not just through superior force, but through superior understanding of the enemy's mind. Dr. Marcus Webb was making even more disturbing discoveries in his laboratory, on Earth. As he studied brain scans from humans whose regulators had failed, he found evidence that the suppression technology had done more than just limit emotional responses. The regulators didn't just suppress aggression, he explained to his research team. They were limiting cognitive function. The humans we're seeing now are thinking faster, learning quicker, and solving problems with capabilities we didn't know our species possessed. He showed them brain scans that revealed neural activity patterns, unlike anything in medical literature. Look at the activity in the prefrontal cortex. These patterns suggest information processing speeds that should be impossible for baseline human neurology. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had joined Webb's team after her archaeological discoveries, added her own findings. I've been analyzing the ancient ruins we found, and I think I know what's happening. The evidence suggests that pre-contact humans weren't just terrestrial predators. They were interstellar predators. Webb stared at her in disbelief. What do you mean? Kim activated a holographic display showing her archaeological data. The extinction patterns I found don't match natural disasters or diseases. They match the systematic elimination strategies that human ancestors used on Earth. But these extinctions happened on dozens of worlds across multiple star systems. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. You're saying that ancient humans were already spacefaring when they encountered other species? More than that, Kim replied. I think they were specifically evolved for interstellar predation. The empathy that made us good diplomats, the pattern recognition that helped us mediate conflicts, the strategic thinking that made us valued peacekeepers, all of these were originally adaptations for hunting intelligent prey across multiple worlds. Meanwhile, across human space, the awakening continued to spread. On research stations, in colonial settlements, aboard trading vessels, humans were discovering capabilities they had never imagined they possessed. A human engineer on Proxima Station redesigned an alien power system and improved its efficiency by 300%. When asked how she had done it, she replied that the solution had simply occurred to her, as if she had always known it. Human traders began negotiating deals with alien merchants and consistently achieved terms so favorable that some species accused them of using mind control technology. The humans insisted they were simply reading body language and vocal patterns, but their accuracy in predicting alien behavior was unnaturally precise. Most disturbing of all were the reports from human children whose regulators had never been activated. On worlds where the cascade failure had prevented new installations, human children were growing up without suppression for the first time in centuries. These children demonstrated intelligence and abilities that shocked their parents and teachers. They learned alien languages in days instead of months. They solved complex puzzles that challenged adult minds. They displayed an intuitive understanding of alien psychology that allowed them to manipulate adult behavior with frightening effectiveness. 1. Report from the colony world of New Eden described a 7-year-old human child who had convinced a Vorthak trading delegation to give her their entire cargo shipment in exchange for a handful of colored stones. When asked how she had done it, the child replied that she had simply told the traders what they wanted to hear. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's 3 centuries of peaceful behavior had not been natural evolution. It had been the suppression of the most successful predatory species in known space, and now that suppression was ending. On Kepler Station, Ambassador Sarah Chen received a communication from Earth that changed everything. The message was brief and coded, but its meaning was clear. The artificial constraints were being removed. Not just the emotion regulators, but all of the genetic modifications, psychological conditioning, and educational programs that had transformed humanity from predators into peacekeepers. For the first time in 300 years, humans were going to be allowed to become what they truly were. Sarah looked out at the galaxy beyond the station and felt something she had never experienced before. Not just the absence of suppression, but the presence of something ancient and powerful that had been waiting for. The Kethvar Empire made their declaration of war against humanity with typical arrogance. War Prime Skrathak announced from his throne world that the Empire would cleanse the galaxy of the human pest before their madness spreads further. The Kethvar had good reason for confidence. They commanded the most powerful military force in known space. Their warriors were bred for combat, their ships were designed for conquest, and their strategy had crushed dozens of species over the past 2 centuries. They expected to defeat humanity within months. They were completely unprepared for what humanity had become. Commander Jake Morrison received the war declaration while reviewing tactical data on his command ship above New Pacifica. His staff of formerly peaceful human soldiers had spent weeks analyzing Kethvar military doctrine with the cold precision of apex predators studying prey. "They're making the same mistake everyone makes," Morrison told his senior officers. "They're fighting the humans they think they know, not the humans we actually are." Lieutenant Chen, whose strategic mind had been unleashed when her regulator failed, displayed their analysis of Kethvar psychology. Their entire culture is built on the concept of honorable combat. They fight to prove superiority, not just to win. That gives us multiple vectors of attack. Morrison smiled with predatory satisfaction. "Show me." The plan that Chen revealed was brilliant in its ruthlessness. Humanity wouldn't meet the Kethvar in direct combat, where their physical advantages would matter. Instead, they would target the psychological foundations that held Kethvar society together. The first phase began with surgical strikes on Kethvar communication networks. Human forces, moving with stealth and precision that shocked their enemies, disabled military communications across 3 star systems. But they didn't just cut the networks. They replaced them with psychological warfare broadcasts. The messages were crafted by humans who now understood alien psychology with predatory clarity. They didn't threaten or boast. Instead, they whispered doubts into Kethvar minds about their culture, their leaders, and their chances of victory. "Your war prime sends you to die while he hides behind his throne," the broadcasts suggested in perfect Kethvar dialect. "Your ancestors conquered through strength, but you follow leaders who fear human children." The psychological assault was devastatingly effective. Kethvar warriors who had never questioned their superiority began to doubt their purpose. Their rigid command structure, which had been their greatest strength, became a vulnerability as lower-ranked warriors lost faith in their leaders. Ambassador Sarah Chen coordinated the diplomatic aspects of the war from a hidden command center on Earth. But her diplomacy was no longer about finding peaceful solutions. It was about finding the most efficient ways to destroy enemy morale. "The Kethvar allied with the Zephani because they respect warrior culture," she explained to her team. "But what if we could convince the Zephani that the Kethvar consider them inferior allies?" Her staff, all humans whose regulators had failed, began crafting messages that would be intercepted by Zephani intelligence. The messages, appearing to come from Kethvar commanders, contained dismissive comments about Zephani combat abilities and strategic value. Within days, the alliance between the 2 warrior species began to fracture. The Zephani withdrew their support, convinced that the Kethvar had been insulting them behind their backs. The Kethvar, already demoralized by human psychological warfare, found themselves facing humanity alone. Dr. Marcus Webb contributed to the war effort by analyzing alien neurology and developing weapons specifically designed to exploit species-specific weaknesses. The devices he created didn't kill. They induced psychological states that made enemy soldiers unable to function effectively. HFY consciousness is based on hierarchical certainty, he explained to the weapons development team. If we can create devices that interfere with their ability to recognize rank and authority, their entire military structure will collapse. The neural disruptors Webb designed were deployed in the second phase of the war. Human forces used them to create chaos in HFY ranks, causing soldiers to become confused about their orders and commanders. The proud warrior species found themselves unable to maintain basic military organization. But the most devastating aspect of humanity's war effort was how quickly they adapted and improved. Every HFY tactic was analyzed, countered, and turned against them within hours. Every piece of captured technology was reverse-engineered and improved by human minds operating without artificial constraints. A human engineer named David Park captured a HFY battleship and redesigned its weapons systems in a single day. His modifications not only improved the ship's firepower, but made it capable of broadcasting the psychological warfare frequencies that were breaking HFY morale across the galaxy. "I don't understand how I knew what to do," Park admitted, when asked about his rapid success. "The solutions just occurred to me, as if I was remembering something I had always known. The war that the HFY had expected to last months was effectively over in weeks. Their fleets were destroyed, their colonies surrendered, and their home world was blockaded by human forces that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. War Prime Skrathak, facing the complete collapse of his empire, demanded a meeting with human representatives. He expected to negotiate terms with the diplomatic species he remembered. Instead, he found himself facing Ambassador Sarah Chen, whose predatory smile made him instinctively step backward despite his warrior training. "You wanted to demonstrate the natural order," Chen said, her voice carrying the same deadly calm she had always possessed, but now without any artificial restraint. "Congratulations. You succeeded." The terms of surrender were not negotiated. They were dictated. The HFY Empire would be dissolved, their military would be disbanded, their warrior culture would be replaced with educational programs designed by human psychologists who understood exactly how to reshape a species' fundamental identity. "But we are warriors," Skrathak protested weakly. "Combat is our nature. Without war, we have no purpose." Chen studied the defeated War Prime with the analytical gaze of a predator examining broken prey. "You were warriors. Now you're something else. You'll learn to find purpose in whatever we decide is appropriate for your species." The speed and completeness of humanity's victory sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The peaceful species that had served as mediators and peacekeepers for 3 centuries had just demonstrated military capabilities that surpassed every known civilization. But what truly terrified the galaxy was the realization of how the victory had been achieved. Humanity hadn't won through superior technology or larger armies. They had won by understanding their enemies better than their enemies understood themselves. High Chancellor Vorthak called an emergency session of the remaining Confederation leadership. The crystalline being's normally steady light patterns flickered with anxiety as he addressed the handful of species representatives who remained. "We must face the truth," he said, his voice resonating with defeat. "Humanity was never the peaceful species we believed them to be. They were predators who had learned to disguise themselves as prey. Ambassador HFY, whose warrior species had once been proud allies of the Confederation, spoke with the voice of someone who had seen his entire worldview shattered. They didn't just defeat the HFY, they broke them. They turned the most feared warriors in the galaxy into confused, demoralized civilians in a matter of weeks. The implications were clear to everyone present. If humanity could do that to the Kethvar, they could do it to any species in the galaxy. The beings who had been trusted to maintain peace were actually capable of destroying any civilization they chose to target. Dr. Elizabeth Park addressed the Confederation via holographic transmission from Earth. Her message was simple and terrifying in its implications. "The artificial constraints on humanity have been permanently removed," she announced. "We will no longer pretend to be something we are not. However, we have no interest in conquest for its own sake. We are predators, but we are intelligent. Predators. We understand that a healthy ecosystem requires diversity." She paused to let the implications sink in before continuing. "The galaxy will continue to function much as it has before. Trade, diplomacy, and cooperation will remain the foundations of interstellar civilization. But there will be new rules. The eBay. New rules were simple, but absolute. Species that threatened galactic stability would be dealt with swiftly and permanently. The Confederation would continue to exist, but under human oversight. Most importantly, no species would be allowed to develop the kind of aggressive military culture that had led to the Kethvar's downfall. "We spent 3 centuries learning how to maintain peace," Park explained. "Now we will use that knowledge more directly. You will have peace because the alternative is too dangerous to consider." On New Pacifica, Commander Morrison looked out at the stars and felt a satisfaction deeper than any emotion he had experienced during his years as a suppressed peacekeeper. Humanity had reclaimed its proper place in the galactic order. Children were growing up without emotion regulators for the first time in